Oh, all right. I'm so tired. I did what must be it's been a 12-kilometer walk, and I'm so out of shape and, starting to look like Homer Simpson, and I'm not even joking. Not up here, but here. This is a Homer Simpson like protuberance I've developed. And my nose is running and I'm sneezing. They said it was a bad year for pollen, but I haven't really had issues with allergies for a long time. But I think because I can't keep up the high output activities, the cycling and other hiking that I would do. I mean, I'm walking if I can 40 or 50K a week, which to me feels like nothing, although it hurts. And yet, you're perpetually you're really, the problem with walking is you're gonna help maintain whatever health you have. So that's been proven. Walking 45 minutes a day, even with a good diet and community, is enough to optimize your well-being, especially as you age. We don't have to be constantly striving. But the problem is, it seems that the that my past life was what did a lot to control my allergies and exercise induced asthma. And so now I guess my allergies are coming back, and I don't have any toilet paper or Kleenex right now, because I try not to buy that at all. you know just another thing that shouldn't exist, right? We should go back. There bidets would be way better than cutting down trees in northern Ontario. Like, this is shocking. It's a pristine, ancient part of the planet, the oldest rocks in the world. Like, it's a pretty harsh environment up there. It's all lakes and the bugs aren't as bad as they used to be, but the bugs are bad, and the forests are impassable for the most part. You could walk 10-20 feet off the side of a road, turn around, and have completely lost your way. So these are more stunted trees. They're not tall because they have to grow in very harsh conditions. And but in spite of that, these are potentially deadly forests to just wander into. And you would have to live in a pretty remote part of northern Ontario, or do what I did, which was do some tree planting in desperation. That just turned out to be another rip-off gig job, where it seemed to me all they were doing was breaking all the rules when nobody was watching, and teaching young people how important the top dog was, and how important making money was, and how you should do that with drugs. So yeah, I wasn't impressed. There's just too much of this cowboy crap still going on everywhere in this world, and a lot of the evidence seems to suggest that the tree planting doesn't work because it's unnatural. We're not making decisions as to how to best manage those forests in the first place, other than clear cutting them. And then once we've clear cut them, we've interrupted the whole cycle of trees growing, being replaced by other trees, and going through their natural life cycle. It's called succession. So once you just chop a bunch of trees down, okay, so nature, windstorms, that Tungusi event, I'm not saying it right. It turns out it was a comet, or a meteorite, because it didn't hit the Earth, so it's a meteor or a comet or something, and it had a near miss. It came so close to hitting the Earth and impacted the upper atmosphere, luckily up in the most remote parts of Russia then, and the concussion, the air blast from that thing bouncing off the atmosphere. You gotta think about that, right? It's not hitting the ground. It's just compressing the air enough such that it skips off this near miss, and on the way undetected, because we weren't watching for these things back there. So I mean, I don't know if anybody saw it coming in, and certainly nobody saw it going, because it took them forever to figure out what had happened. And what they were left with was thousands and thousands of acres of trees just blown to the ground. So, okay, well, is that a clear cut? I guess. So really, in a lot of ways, the best way for a forest to recover post fire, post natural disaster, or even post clear cutting is to leave it be and let nature take over, and then you get the grasses and the little roots start growing, and this brings in the birds and it brings in the small animals, and then all now the predators are coming back in. And then you get the trees that grow up first, that grow very quickly. And, but the problem is business doesn't have that patience. And there's all this political nonsense about how our problems, we just need to plant more trees. I mean, it's absurd. It doesn't work because we end up planting species, not because they're the right ones. We're trying to skip steps on nature. We don't let succession happen. And we just create these monocultures, or the trees don't grow at all. And don't kid yourself. The choices of what to plant are often made on the basis of harvesting those new trees as quickly as possible. And again, this just disrupts the sorts of ways nature would recover better on its own. So this idea that we're fixing or improving the problems that we've caused by our own solutions is absurd, because those solutions are just as much as the problem as the behaviors that forced us to create those solutions in the first place. It's just this runaway problem. So again, I'm trying to go back to last time I looked at. I'm technicizing the word facts, which is a problematic analysis, right? And the postmodernist view would be there's no such things, that everything's made up. Well, that's absurd, because then what they just said is made up, so it's not real, and we're just back to before postmodernism, right? If you produce a theory and people logically insistent, evident, whatever, and its thesis is there is no truths, then that includes that statement, there is no truths. That can't be true either. And that's the whole problem. Of course, everybody believes the idea that people say truth. If you didn't believe in truth, you wouldn't speak at all. Like you understand that. You wouldn't get in arguments over things. Of course, everyone is a natural realist, dualist, and realist about truth, and all of this other esoteric stuff is because you got to go back to the stuff that's right in front of your nose sometimes, and get out of the stupid clouds, right? Where this sophistry. We were warned. Wittgenstein was right. The positives were right about problems with metaphysical excess, although their own theoretical assumptions turned out to be impossible to cash out. And of course, even Wittgenstein in his use-based model, there will be criticisms about lacunas, about aspects of meaning that he gets wrong or aren't addressed, etc., etc., etc. So nobody has the whole picture here. So the idea is that if we're dealing, and we can't take our mindfulness out of it or our vitality, and ultimately I think this is a problem, and this is why I also think the measurement problem is a pseudo problem, because it wants to take it has this assumption that it can reduce all experience to explanation in the matter, but its experiments are still intentionally constructed, operationalized, and carried out by minds that are vital. And I don't think we're understanding there's a possible circle there, that the problem of entanglement is a pseudo problem because they're treating it as theoretically only belonging to the level of pure matter, but that they're begging the question. And so what they're not seeing is the measurement problem is like an artifact of the failure to see that these models are forever fully embedded within vitality and mindfulness in a way that you'll never get those things out in any reduced terms. In fact, all you're going to do in reducing is go back in time to where there were no minds or lives, right? If we're just going to take it that Earth is the only life, and that's consistent with my model. So for 9.5 billion years, you're looking at nothing but matter, and so what we know about the universe in that terms is all factual. The laws, contingent though they might be, approximate though they're all facts about, but they're just about matter. So if I'm going to be skeptical about the existence of facts, I'm doing it in this way. So the interesting thing is, so there's nothing arbitrary about facts. But as soon as we get into biological norms, we're going to be dealing with the arbitrary almost immediately. And this is because there's just no way to model life, to model vitality, whether or not you're concerned about the ontological problems, just prima facie terms, like right in front of your nose, look at the things. Get a degree in genetics or biology, and you will not, if you dedicate yourself and you master and internalize this content, you will not question its epistemic value, right? And you will treat a lot of that biological, like I'm sure everybody in biology, especially where it's not being poisoned by cultural bias and other stuff. So like where you're just dealing with biological entities and aspects of metabolism and how molecule, and all that experimental stuff, like a hard biology, right? Descriptive, with some distance from this, I think, this tacit notion we keep promoting of our own superiority, which is just absurd. So at the level of a cell, you got a little tiny thing, one of the smallest things you can actually directly observe, right? And the original cells were smaller still, and then you have the viruses. And by the time you get down to viruses, which I think are just parasites, because you can't have viruses until you have free living cells. I don't see the problem here. It's a problem. It's a problem of regressive parasitism, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just that the question as to whether viruses are alive or not is another. It's a confused question. No, they're not wholly, but then they're not wholly. Not that. I think that's right. It's just that were there no free living cells, there could be no viruses. So the question as to whether they're alive or not is confused about the dependency that viruses have on free living life. So they're like a degenerate form, and some people think they were a tool created by bacteria. Again, I talked about this, how all the bacteria in all the oceans and probably everywhere, they're entangled with each other. They're communicating with each other, and at that level they must be entangled. They built structures between themselves. And so how do we know they didn't just create the viruses for their own similar purposes? But then of course, you can't control all you make. That's the parable of Frankenstein's monster, right? You just because you've created something doesn't mean you can control it, And so, look at a cell doing a basic detection. You look at an avoidance reaction where it's detecting pH that gets too high, and in these little detectors that are in the membrane function to become entangled with protons. And then of course the other mechanisms, so as these detections happen, proton, there's some way within the cell that the other metabolic, the internal interstice, was very complicated, which goes on in even the simplest cells. So don't discount the immense amount of underappreciated complexity in even the tiniest archaebacteria. So there's also some kind of integrative summing or sampling. and also an ability to extract a differential gradient. And so it's we're getting a lot of we're getting a lot of H plus detections, because if there's too much acid, you're going to be detecting more hydronium ion, positive hydronium ion, which is the active component of all acids. And then there's also the summation that's like, this is too much. And then there's the thing, where is it too much? And then the little bacteria goes and goes in the other direction until those hydronium detectors calm back down, and then it can shift to fulfilling its metabolic need by expelling waste across the membrane, or through osmosis, or actively bringing these things across, or through pores, and all this other beautiful complexity you're going to find in even the simplest cell. They're going to perpetuate their existence again long enough to replicate, for which for a cell is just to divide. Although they do other things. They share genes in various ways, including something they created viruses to do that. They just escape the bounds of that use. And so the only way you can understand and assess this is by introducing a binary, a representational theory of mind binary to it extends the whole vehicle, content, referential target, and we had add a fourth component to the machinery of vital representation. And this is in a very non-conscious, and there's no attention, there's no real perception here, right? This is passive behavior. Now, I'm still going to say it's behavior because it's vital. I've tried to technicize the definition of behavior to be something that only living things can do, and that if there are non-living things said to behave, it's a derived kind of analogically intuitive behavior. But we can't just assimilate identity, because there's too many disanalogies. So those little wind twisters, what are they called? I remember seeing that one I told you about, and I was like 14. It was near a friend's apartment, and I was just walking home or going to his place, and then this little dust devil, that's what it is, just conjured itself out of nothing. I guess these buildings created a little wind tunnel. This happens a lot in cities because of buildings. And I just sat there rapt watching this thing, because it really kind of looked alive, right? And imagine an impressionable younger mind who doesn't have this sophistication now. So there's a norm of biofunction, right? And this is non-arbitrary, and at the level of perpetuating this metabolism against the efforts, well, that's to anthropomize. All living things act in abeyance to the second law locally, and they only do this because they can extract ordered energy from background fluxes. Primarily here on Earth, the background flux is the solar radiation coming from the sun. But of course, where did that come from? And now you're back to the story of the Big Bang and the internal phase space of the Big Bang singularity, which is this bizarre thing that's infinitely energized and yet almost impossibly perfectly ordered. Because how else, if we believe everything came out of a Big Bang, and it's been disordering itself since it's absurd. And there's all kinds of misconceptions about entropy and how it can change. It's a very difficult concept to wrap your head around, and I've been struggling with that concept for 10, 15 years too, and information and all of it. And you need to, because it's like the waste. It's like the waste as not waste, and the waste as poison problem, which is what this is all about. So as we go up over scales, as we develop, as life becomes collaborative and intricative, right, and starts to organize itself into a hierarchy of higher scale order and function. It's impossible. Why does the liver develop from the genome of a mammal or a chordate or whatever, the low level of which all things have livers? Well, because the role of the liver is to clean the blood. And so if there weren't some aim implicit in that developmental machinery and the toolkit of the DNA, you know, you can't begin to look at the pathological and non-pathological cases where things are functioning well or ideally versus when they're functioning poorly or they stop functioning at all. And that requires bionorms. And at the very basics, and this is the commonalities in all life. So these box genes and Hox genes and it's a homeobox genes. And these genes are shared across the entire genome. And their functions are non-arbitrary and within, at least on the planet life, very universally functional. And if things go wrong accidentally with these genes due to environmental toxins or other kind of defects, then the animal is going to not only not function right, it's going to die. And that's the bionorm of total failure is death, at least if you die without reproducing, although that's a little overwrought. So it isn't necessary that you have children to perpetuate all your genes. If you have really good genes, they're probably in somebody else, and even if you can't reproduce, they're more likely to get that chance. So this idea, we see this, that you get the ugly guy marries the pretty girl and they just have beautiful children, or people will try to match smart with smart and then they get dumb kids, but then those dumb kids get together with the kids and they have a genius. So, this idea that there's some easy and strict predictability here, this is this ridiculous notion of Mendelian simple recessive and dominant genes. It's just, it just, there was truth in it, but it was overwrought and it's turned out to be a lot more complicated. And I think the whole dogma of DNA as a code is absurd. I just think that's part of the problem why people won't take models like mine seriously, right? Because I think biology is an ontological entity. I believe that the manifest, naive appearance parts of reality that would reduce only to perpetual belief, pre-linguistic, they're entirely pre-entangled by life. Life is making that up non-consciously, locally, because it's non-conscious. It has to, something has happened to cause the genome such that life is now not only perpetuating itself, but it's building things. And it's like there's something in that DNA. It's a compression of all of the history of the universe in its own Hilbert space. This leveled down pre-material universe that I call the quantum holism. It's sampling itself in its potential phase state, and poof, it's like a cell that emerges, or the opening. And I think that's an ontological step. Just the idea of an inside and outside in matter. Now matter has been transformed ontologically, and this is. I got to do this intro video. I'm just gonna have trouble getting through this one. I'm very sore from that walk. So there's no problem. There's no problem there because these norms from the bottom, they're non-arbitrary. They're norms. They're not in really facts because they're contingent facts, because we would assume life is contingent. I might argue it's not, which would change the terms of the argument. But for this argument, right, we transition into free living cells, and now we're going to introduce into our representational toolkit to describe these entities, to describe this natural kind, and to provide its own definitional essence and ontology. It starts, these norms are very non-arbitrary. But I'm gonna pause this just for a second. All right, so I can pause the video, but when it stops, I can't restart it. Like, but I can. I'm sure I could buy an app to do that. Like, why not? Nobody has ever accidentally paused a video. I mean, it just. I remember this when tablets came out, and they had no undo, and I typed up like an hour's worth of very complicated text. I think it was reading Sartre then, and only to accidentally trying to copy it, selecting it all, and then accidentally deleting it. And then I'm like, I can't undo that. So they perfected, finally got computers to really work, and then they introduced gutted, useless things like tablets and smartphones. Like I just don't. Why do we fall for this crap? Where this lie that this stuff gets better, it just goes sideways all the time. As soon as they get it to a really good point, then they have no justification to keep developing more crap no one asks for. It's also predictable. So let's talk about the famous in this is in philosophy, teleosemantic theories and naturalism. This is a worry, a case, because with the problem of dysfunction, function and dysfunction in terms of expressed bionorms, like you don't get the direction where the PhD is going to fry you wrong, right? That would be a horrible failure to fulfill the norm of detecting the higher gradient, such to turn and move away from it. So there's dysfunction. But when we get up to animals that perceive and may in fact be at least minimally, if not sufficiently, sentient, that problem of dysfunction slips and slides into the one of misrepresentation. And so we have the case of the frog that snaps at BBs, and this creates all kinds of problems for casual accounts because it would seem impossible to explain why the frogs would snap at BBs at all. So there's this deeper question: are they misrepresenting BBs as flies, or have they never really represented flies? They've just represented some bulk movement that reliably, right? And there's the functional and normal thing, in most frogs would successfully snap at flies. It just that turns out down the road, the way that developed, it was never actually really detecting flies per se, but a certain kind of reliable movement and scale and other thing. And so it just turns out that if you throw a BB in front of a frog, it will snap at it like a fly. And so this is supposed to be a case of misrepresentation, but I think I have a solution here that involves quantum entanglement again, and the fact that there is no, everything ends in, if you're going to create these esoteric classical problems always over these classical binaries, you're always going to end up in these problems that you can't solve because you've just created another absurdio. You're not looking at you're not asking the questions right. You're not defining life right. You're denigrating life. We're stuck in this reductive monism where physics is going to cover it all, and they have no argument for that. This is what I'm trying to get at with this background story of classicalism. And so that's good. It's about 30 minutes. I never get to where I want to. So, but this is the thing, without boring you with all the jargon, I looked through the book, and there's just the story I'm trying to tell here is picked up in various pieces with a bunch of different case studies. And I'm just trying to pull out a non-jargony, simple facts are about pre-vital, pre-mindful matter, and that's it. And of course, even by the time there's vitality in minds, which you would think you would need to even observe and mathematize and model those things, you're going to find that the normative comes in. That's the constructivism. So what is it? It's constructionism and constructivism. One of them is absurd and ridiculous, And the other one is reasonable, because it's about the fact that even when we're properly modeling objective, non-mind independent things, like no, we're going to have to make normative decisions about those mathematical methods. And BOMDAS was the one. Understanding BOMDAS requires no magical genius insight into the nature, the essence of numbers. It just doesn't. It just shows that you're smart enough to understand that there's an ambiguity. We broke the symmetry, communicated that norm so we could get on with doing math non-ambiguously. So if you think you're smarter because you can get BOMDAS questions right, I don't think you are smarter. You just have a good memory. Unless you understand the motivation for BOMDAS. It's the same problem with seeing patterns in the arbitrary symbols and the arbitrary bases. Those patterns don't exist in the numbers. And these conflations and confusions happen not only amongst the unwashed, the lay, but they happen amongst academics who should know better. And there's a lot of conflating of things, a lot of Descartes nonsense mistakes still are replicated. So I just the last thing I wanted to do here. So I'm doing this kind of bulk tripart facts, very 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 non-arbitrary biological norms to more arbitrary, but like the taboo case. Let's just quickly touch on that. That's a it's not a fully arbitrary norm, this bias we have, the taboos around certain body fluids. And of course, there's all kinds of confusing and paradoxical behaviors there, where people will poo-poo something in one context, but you get them in the right mood, and they forget all about those taboos and biases because they're driven by being sexually hungry, right? And that's that's my identity is I can get my rocks off better than anybody. This is the whole thing. Reducing ourselves to sexual identity is a real problem, because the deeper question is nobody can say how anyone has an identity at all, and how to go about saying what that is. So to me, this is just a way to cover up by deciding that sexual identity is all we are, because then we can argue about our bits and how we want to culturally divide ourselves on the nature of those, our comfort with having those bits. But it just avoids asking deeper questions about identity, which should be this ridiculous juvenile sexual politics is for children, and the fact that we're imposing it on children as adults is the most shocking thing to me. It's hard enough to go through puberty without all of these cultural, political biases being dumped on you. I mean, can't we let kids play more outside and just maybe give them the basic facts they need to make better decisions about their sexuality, and let them understand that the next 10 years of their life they shouldn't be making rash decisions at all, because nobody knows who they are, and in the end none of us are comfortable in our bodies either. And so that's my ultimate worry there. So yeah, I'm doing this facts, non-arbitrary to pseudo-arbitrary, like these taboos with their paradoxical outcomes. It's not totally arbitrary because you don't want to eat your poo a lot, but you also shouldn't, you don't have to lose sleep over if a dog licks your face and you smell a poo molecule. Like you're going to be fine, because people don't seem to understand that to actually get an infection most of the time requires hundreds and hundreds of thousands of exposure to those virial elements, or a small amount of the virulent bacteria has found a hidey hole due to a wound or a health condition in which to fester. So, don't eat your poo, but if you touch poo accidentally, you just wash your hands. You don't have to go to the hospital. So there's a norm of behavior around bodily waste that's sort of arbitrary, non-arbitrary. And then the examples I'm going to be getting at tomorrow are going to be the funny biological cultural ones, and there's some really funny ones that will help me make my point. And I'm going to show you that there's a lot of ways we speak about things lazily in terms that the naive might infer are always propositionally made claims. But I just think by the time you get to even bionorms, you're not dealing with facts primarily anymore, and to talk of those things as factual is going to become a problem at some point. So I'm going to try to deconstruct the case of which side of the road we drive on, and how we got there, right? Because most would say it's a fact most people drive on the right side of the road, and I'm going to say, well, I don't know if that's a fact, really, at least not in the sense that it's a pure material fact, right? And that's the important difference I'm trying to defend. And so I guess what was this other thing? I looked at the work here, and in the end, I actually divided the three categories into sort of five, very complicated and jargony, because of course that's what us philosophers do, right? If we can get to the point that we sound erudite and no one questions us for that, and we can continue to promote that false reputation by spewing more see in there, I'm just failing. So yeah, I had like five different, and I can't even find it now. I put the page down, and now I can't find the thing. I actually ended up having subdistinctions here. So this is what I'm talking about. It's just facts in matter, relatively, almost absolutely non-arbitrary norms at the beginning of life, to increasingly arbitrary norms by the time we get to mammals and primates. And then the real problematic areas is the fall off the cliff in human culture from relatively arbitrary / non-arbitrary to totally arbitrary norms. And so much of the nonsense going on today is just people arguing over the most arbitrary norms as if they're facts. And this doesn't make any sense. It's a madness in us, and it needs to stop. So that's what tomorrow's topic is going to reveal. Have a great evening.